I'm here at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Portland, Oregon, and today is the first day in a novena to St. Joseph in the year of our Lord 2024. Now, we've done several novenas to St. Joseph in the past, and this time we're doing something a little different. We're not looking at the life of St. Joseph or the virtues of St. Joseph, but we're looking at one who had a great devotion to St. Joseph, and we will learn about St. Joseph through this man's devotion to St. Joseph. And that man is the saint, the religious brother Andre, St. Andre Bessette of the Order of Holy Cross, who was responsible for the building of the great Oratoire Saint-Joseph in Montreal. So this is a book called The Miracle of the Mountain, a story of Brother Andre and the Shrine on Mount Royal, written by Alden and published in 1959 by Hawthorne Books. Now, there are 18 chapters in this book, and we only have 9 days. So obviously we won't get to all the book, but we're going to start here with chapter 2, in fact, and not chapter 1. Chapter 2, A Crucifix in a Stable. Perhaps, I should show you the picture here. It's kind of a charming picture of a boy at prayer at the church. Perhaps the closest witness to Brother Andre's youth was his niece, Madame Athalie Lafleur, daughter of his younger sister, who testified before the subsidiary tribunal in Rhode Island, where she lived. Madame Lafleur's mother had told her many stories of her brother's childhood, and when Brother Andre came to stay with them in the United States in later life, he often reminisced with his sister about their youth. However, Madame Lafleur's testimony leaves many gaps, which may be filled by other witnesses to whom Brother Andre spoke of his boyhood. In addition, Father Henri-Paul Bergeron, Order of Holy Cross, made such a painstaking study of the early life for his biography of Brother Andre that parts of the book were admitted as evidence by the meticulous Sacred Congregation of Rites. Another interesting witness was Adélard Fabre, a lay workman at the oratory, to whom Brother Andre confided many details of his childhood. All this is hearsay evidence. Nevertheless, an accurate picture of that frail little boy of long ago emerges. Especially, one may believe the things that the witnesses swore they had been told directly by Brother Andre, for he was, without question, a man of truth. Question: what do you know of the servant of God's upbringing? To this question, Madame Lafleur could reply that her grandparents were devout Catholics who taught their children the simple faith they held. The whole Bessette family was very pious, she said, and added, Brother Andre's parents died when he was very young. Other witnesses filled in the details. The first few years of Alfred's life, the Bessettes were a very happy family despite their poverty. The gay recollections of their home, which he exchanged with his sister, and which he confided to his friends, show how happy they were. Despite his weak constitution, Alfred was a merry child, perhaps because Isaac Bessette was away from home so much at his work. Brother Andre had only a misty recollection of his father, but his memory of his mother was bright and warm. My mother, knowing that I was very frail, seemed to have more love and care for me than for the others, he said. She kissed me more often than was my turn, and frequently gave me little delicacies in secret. In the evening, when we recited family prayers, I was next to her and followed the prayers on her rosary. In those days, I never saw my mother when she was not smiling, and what a lovely smile. Since her death, she often smiles at me. She comes, and without speaking, looks lovingly at me. I rarely pray for her, but very often I pray to her. When Alfred was about 4 years old, his father found that he could no longer earn a living in Saint-Grégoire. He moved his family to the larger town of Farnham and set himself up as a wheelwright as well as a carpenter. There were more opportunities in Farnham, and for a short while he prospered. In order to earn still more money, Bessette sometimes went out into the woods as a lumberjack. Like his ancestor, Brissatou, Isaac Bessette found death in the forest. One of the great primeval trees that he brought down with his axe fell the wrong way and crushed out his life. He was buried in the cemetery at Farnham. For 4 years more, courageous Clotilde Bessette somehow held the family together. How she managed to do it is a mystery for which the witnesses offer no solution. It is probable that the older boys were able to bring in a little money, and it is known that members of her family and even the neighbors helped to provide food. But the main burden fell on Clotilde. That she carried it so long is a minor miracle of fortitude and faith. Overwork and lack of proper food eventually brought on tuberculosis, the great killer plague of those times, and when Clotilde could no longer support the family, it was broken up. The children were taken into the homes of various relatives, and Clotilde went to live in the adjacent town of Saint-Césaire with her sister Madame Timothée Nadeau, taking only Alfred with her. And that was a sad 2 years for him. His beloved mother quietly faded out of life, still smiling as he recalled. Her last day he remembered very well. When she knew that she was dying, Clotilde asked to see all her children together once more. The kindly aunts and uncles brought them from the scattered villages where they now lived. And as is often the case with consumptives, Clotilde was completely lucid in her last moments, perhaps even more acute than she normally was. With perfect courage, and in the manner of an era when dying was a thing to be done with a dignified regard for the conventions, she made a formal little speech to her children, which was forever engraved on Brother André's brain. "My dear little ones," she said, "it is now 6 years since your papa left us to go to heaven. The good God is coming to look for me in my turn. Pray for me. Do not forget the tomb of your father. My body will repose beside his in the cemetery at Farnham. From the height of heaven I will watch over you." Brother André firmly believed that she kept her word. Question: what do you know of the education of the servant of God? To this question, Madame Lafleur answered, "He was not well instructed." This was an understatement. It is doubtful if, as a child, Brother André learned more than to sign his name, with enormous effort. He attended school very sporadically, if at all, while his mother lived, because he was seldom well enough to venture outdoors during the bitter Canadian winter. And soon after her death, Timothée Nadeau called his nephew to him and told him that it was time to stop weeping and go to work. "You are 12 years old," he said. "At your age I was earning my own living. You must learn to be independent, for we are not rich." Timothée Nadeau was a robust man and a hard worker. So were all of his children. He was generous, but insensitive. As Brother André once remarked, "My uncle was a very strong man, and he expected everyone else to be like him." However, Nadeau was not unreasonable. Brother André recalled that his uncle looked him over and added, "With your feeble health and your withdrawn ways, you can't do everything. I think, Alfred, I'll have you taught to be a shoemaker." So Alfred obediently left the school he had just begun to attend and went to work for the village cobbler. He was not a success. The sensitive little boy, dreaming of his lost mother, missing her spoiling and affection, had no heart for his work, though he tried hard, and never having done anything with his hands, he was incredibly clumsy. He squatted all day on a pile of stiff leather, trying to turn out the cowhide boots which were his master's best-selling item. He was forever pricking his fingers with the awl and having to be bandaged up so his blood would not smear the hides. In addition, probably more for psychosomatic reasons than from actual fatigue, the weak digestion, which he had had all his life, grew worse. He had terrible pains in his stomach and could hardly eat at all. As he remarked later, "You understand, working as a cobbler almost on all fours, hammering away all day, is not good for the digestion." However, he was not resentful of his uncle, merely sorry he was such a disappointment, for he loved the Nadeaus deeply. Fortunately, this particular sojourn in purgatory did not last very long. It is probable that his affectionate aunt begged her husband to find lighter work for Alfred, or possibly the shoemaker got bored with so inept an apprentice. In any event, Alfred went to work in the small local bakery. He did much better there. Life in the Quebec countryside is almost timeless. Things change slowly, if at all. The inhabitants speak the French of Louis XIV's time, almost incomprehensible to modern Parisians, and the bakery where Alfred Bessette worked is still standing and still in business 99 years later. Now keep in mind here that this is being written in 1959, so I don't know if this is still the case in Quebec, but even so. The bakery where Alfred Bessette worked is still standing and still in business 99 years later. The master baker shoves the molded loaves into the same brick oven that it was used then, and the apprentice boy sat on the same stool where Alfred kneaded dough until the proprietor gave it to the Oratory Museum as a hallowed treasure a few years ago. Alfred enjoyed working there. In winter it was kept warm by the crackling wood fire that heated the oven. Sunshine poured through two high windows that looked down the slope to the feed store next door. It smelled like heaven, and still does, with the delicious aroma of baking bread and the sweet fragrance of cakes and pastries. However, this earthly paradise also lasted but a short time for Alfred. In 1860, a year after Alfred went to work in the bakery, Timothée Nadeau got an unexpected attack of gold fever. He settled his family, including Alfred, in Farnham and headed, hopefully, for California. It was now more necessary than ever for Alfred to become self-supporting. He got himself a job with a farmer named Ouimet, in whose house he lived. He appeared to have worked for his board and keep. Question: was the servant of God pious in his youth? To this question Madame Lafleur replied, yes, he was very pious. Once he asked Father Sylvestre, the curé of Farnham, what prayers give the most pleasure to the good God? Father Sylvestre replied, Our Father and Hail Mary. This I know because Brother André told me so himself. Father Bergeron, replying to the same question, testified that Brother André's sister said to him, Ah, if you had known my brother in his youth! On Sunday he passed the greater part of the afternoon praying in the church. Religion had played an important part of Alfred Bessette's life since the cradle. However, his great devotion to God may well have begun with the tragic death of his father and deepened during his mother's long illness. He was never a God-fearing child or man in the grim Puritan phrase. Rather, he put his hand in God's love and perfect trust. His long hours of prayer were not a hardship or a duty, but a time of joyful communion and comfort. If Brother André's secular learning was neglected, his spiritual tutorship was of the highest quality. While he was a child, and thought as a child, his mother's gentle, simple faith fulfilled his needs perfectly. When he approached the age for his first communion and had a need for greater understanding, he had the good fortune to find an inspired teacher. Father Provansal, the curé of Saint-Césaire, was one of those great men who serve the Lord in small ways. Of him Bergeron says, the curé Provençal was a saint, father of all the world. He was a good papa, adored by his parishioners. When he walked down the street, he carried his hat in his hand to avoid the necessity of constantly taking it off, to salute everyone who greeted him. His progress through town was always une fête. A feast, I guess. His progress through town was always a festival, I suppose it means. On the monument they erected to his memory in Saint-Césaire, his people wrote the words, "He was good. He loved us." Father Provansal lived in the cottage-like stone presbytery which snuggled up to his small fieldstone church. On the other side of his house was the 3-story brick building of the convent school, which he had founded and put in the hands of the Sisters of the Presentation in 1857, where 150 little girls from Saint-Césaire and adjacent villages studied the 3 R's as well as Latin and English. The cemetery behind the church and the meadows back of the convent ran down to the rounded grassy banks of the slow-moving Yamaska River, which curved affectionately around St. Césaire. It was a serene sort of place. Alfred Bessette spent most of his spare time either in the church or at the presbytery, and Father Provansal made him welcome. Shortly after his mother's death, the curé began to instruct Alfred for his first communion. He had an eager pupil. The youth cared nothing for history or the current doings of the world. He probably never read a newspaper in his life, but he was avid to learn all there was to know about our Lord and his teachings. It so happened that Father Provansal particularly loved Saint Joseph. He communicated this devotion to his small pupil, who was already so inclined. The curé told Alfred how Saint Joseph had been declared the patron saint of Canada in 1624 by the Récollet Fathers, the first Catholic missionaries who came to Quebec. He described all that was known of Saint Joseph's life, his tender care of Mary and the infant Jesus, his hard and humble life as a carpenter. He is the model for all good workmen, Father Provansal declared. Brother André remembered, replying proudly, "My father was a carpenter too." The Nadeaus brought Alfred a fine blue suit for his first communion, and had his picture taken in it by the local photographer. It shows a round-faced little boy with carefully brushed hair and snapping black eyes. He is wearing a properly serious expression, but one senses that he is ready to break into laughter the moment the photographer releases the bulb. All his life, Brother André loved to laugh, in spite of his intense preoccupation with spiritual things, even perhaps because of it. For he once remarked, "A religious who is sad is a sad religious." And here from a document, "I, the undersigned curé of Saint-Césaire, certify that Alfred Bessette was confirmed in the Church of Saint-Césaire on June 7, 1855, by Monseigneur J.C. Prince." Question: did the servant of God practice any penitences before his entry into the religious life? To this question Madame Lafleur replied, "Already as a child he practiced penitences, sacrificing his leisure. He prayed so long that sometimes my mother was afraid he would injure his health." Adélard Fabre testified, "The only detail I recall of the penitences of Brother André is the following. One day when I was cleaning Brother André's room at the oratory, I showed him a piece of leather with tacks sticking out of it. I thought it was some useless piece of harness. But Brother André said, 'Give me that,' and took it away from me. So I learned that Brother André used it as a belt beneath his soutane. I said to him, 'It is not sensible to wear a belt like that around your body.' Then he told me that when he was a young man he wore a far worse one, and I did not see that belt again." Though she died before she could testify in the cause, Madame Nadeau had told Father Bergeron the story of that other belt. One day, when Alfred was quite ill, she was helping him make his bed. She saw him grimace with pain and noticed a ridge under his clothing. "What are you wearing under your shirt?" she asked. "Nothing," he said like any embarrassed little boy. "Let me see it, child." She lifted up his shirt and discovered the leather belt armed with tacks. "You're going crazy," she said. "With bad health like yours, it's ridiculous to make such a penitence." Alfred shyly said, "It was a sacrifice I had promised. Forgive me, I won't wear it any more." His aunt hugged and kissed him and took the belt away. A little later she had to take an iron chain away from him, and again he promised not to wear it again. But he always invented new sacrifices. His young cousins told on him. "Mother, Alfred doesn't sleep in his bed. He sleeps on the floor. We saw him, Mother. We saw him." Madame Nadeau understood by Alfred's sheepish expression that it was true. "You'll make yourself sick," she said crossly. "Don't do it any more." Naturally, such a boy was an easy target for his hearty cousins. Though they loved him, and he knew them, though they loved him and he them, they simply could not resist teasing him. They never knew whether Alfred would laugh at the joke on himself or burst into tears. In the light of his later life, it is evident that these ordeals of Alfred's youth and the penitences he imposed on himself were a testing and a preparation. At the same time, such a child must have been a trial to those who loved him. They could not understand him or foresee the life for which he was preparing himself. Nor could he. He did these things because something within him made him want to sacrifice himself for the love of God. Question: did the servant of God practice his religion faithfully in his youth? Father Albert Cousineau, superior of Saint-Joseph's during Brother André's last years, answered, "Brother André told me that never once had he neglected to say his rosary. At one time he used to go to a stable where he spent hours on his knees praying and meditating before a crucifix." That was after Timothée Nadeau had moved his family to Farnham, and Alfred went to work on Monsieur Ouimet's farm. The Ouimets were not as religious as the Bessettes. They went to Mass on Sunday, but that was the extent of their devotion. Alfred found it difficult to understand them. In addition, the hard work on the farm and the distance from town made it impossible for him to keep up his own devotions. He did not have a place of his own to pray. Then he had a happy chance. Ouimet went to an auction. An old wooden crucifix was knocked down to him for a few sous. He was a man who could not resist a bargain, and when he brought it home, Alfred's eyes were so bright with pleasure that Ouimet could not help saying, "Would you like this for your own?" "Oh, so much, so very much." "Take it then," Ouimet said brusquely. "I don't need it." Alfred clasped it and thought of the one place where he could be quiet. He carried his treasure out to the barn and hung it on a nail. Then he knelt down on the straw in an ecstasy of happiness. After that, Alfred spent all his spare time in the barn. Rainy days were lucky days for him because he could remain there for hours kneeling before his crucifix. He formed the habit of carrying on long conversations with St. Joseph. Not that he thought his patron saint answered him in words, but as he talked, a sense of complete understanding and accord entered his soul. End of chapter 2. And we will pause there for today. And now we will pray the Novena to St. Joseph. And you can find the Novena prayers on a separate video in the attachment or in a link. Well, let's see. You'll find the prayers in a link below this video in the description. And if you print that out double-sided with a short-sided binding and fold it in half, you have a little, well, that's the format. That's the way it's formatted. So join me in just a moment. Click on the attachment for the Novena prayer, or print it out and pray it on your own. And I'll see you tomorrow for day 2. And don't miss a day of prayer with us.